Demon's Souls. Often known as the first of the Soulsborne series, kind of. I mean, there was stuff before this, like Kingsfield, but regardless, Demon's Souls was sort of what ushered it into modern pop culture. It has a lot of interesting bosses, villains, enemies, and lore, and today I thought we'd take a look at the 5 funnest, most interesting bosses, our best bosses from the game that we really enjoyed. Nate, we actually did a Let's Play of this. Where is that?
It's over on the Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays.
And where can they find how to get there if they want to watch someone play through Demon's Souls?
I'm going to assume the description down below.
That is absolutely right, Nate. You get to live another day. But let's hop right into the video. Number 5.
The first one we have on our list is the Adjudicator, which none of us knew how to pronounce until about 5 minutes ago. But the Adjudicator was really interesting, I thought. It's basically this big fat guy with a golden crow. Now that sounds really dumb, but it actually is really interesting. And if you look around the lore with the Adjudicator, basically he has this shield which provides some background information where it says, a large wooden shield that depicts a brightly colored scene of the deceased being judged. And on the other side, an epigram is carved in old script, cowardly acts and the eating of birds must not be the deeds of a hero of storms. If the one being judged displeases the adjudicator's master, the golden crow, the deceased soul will be gnawed upon until nothing but their bones remain.
So something that's really cool about this boss is it's really open to interpretation.
Yeah.
No one really knows if the crow or the body under the crow, the adjudicator, existed before the colorless fog that rolls over the land because of the old one and because of the curse and all, everything going on with the soul arts. No one knows if that actually existed ahead of time or if that was something that existed after the fog rolled through the land and it just brought to life this belief that the Shadow Men had, because they worshipped this being as essentially a judgment god that they would be judged by when they died.
Right.
To essentially judge their worth. They were these warriors from what we can understand from the game and the lore. It's also worth mentioning that when we talk about the lore in this, we're talking about it to the best of our abilities, because Demon's Souls, out of the entire modern Soulsborne franchise, is the most open to interpretation, most bare bones lore out of all of them. You're lucky to get 2 to 3 sentences about a boss.
Right.
And that's what you have to work off of. It got fat. So people are like, why is it so fat? It seems that the fog, if it did exist beforehand, corrupted it, and now it feeds on everything, or it brought to life just a perverted version of the belief. So we don't know if it was an existing thing that got corrupted, or if it was, okay, we'll make your god come to life. Oh, here's a sick, messed up version of him.
Yeah, and it's also interesting because the crow itself is actually the god.
Mm-hmm.
And the demon part of it seems to be a corrupted vessel that the god is using to do its deeds.
Mm-hmm.
So I find that kind of interesting. And the part that I find the most fascinating about this is all the main enemies of this world are skeletons.
Mm-hmm.
And the lore itself actually says the deceased will be gnawed upon until nothing but their bones remain. So that's literally what got gnawed upon.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Shadow Men, and now you can see all the skeletons. I find that very interesting.
It is.
But there's also some interesting lore surrounding it. It has this like knife thing or this sword thing stuck in its stomach.
Yeah, its blade is broken.
Yes.
And it has it protruding out of one of the sides of it. It's actually a weak point you can hit the boss in.
Right. And I find that so fascinating. There is some interpretation surrounding that. There doesn't seem to be a clear consensus idea of why that is there. But how I've always seen it is if you look in the boss arena, when you walk in, there's basically a big hole in the ground. And then he is at the bottom of the hole, and there's a bunch of like blood everywhere and stuff. Now there's blood everywhere because he ate people. But it kind of seems like he fell down that hole and then landed on his sword.
Mm-hmm. And it also seems like the reason he might have fallen down was because he got fat.
Right, yeah.
One thing that's interesting with the Shadow Men in this area is we know that the gods they worship tend to be in the sky.
Yeah.
Especially, we'll get into later, the storm beasts. Mm-hmm. Those are something, so it stands to reason by that logic that the Adjudicator would have been up high on this platform.
Right.
And it would have been this thing, where they went, whether it existed or not, up to this shrine, maybe brought their dead there to be judged.
Mm-hmm.
And then if this thing just kept eating and eating and eating, that body under it got so big that it broke the floor, fell through, and landed on its sword. Other people think that the Adjudicator on top, like that the crow on top, is controlling the body, and that the body has some level of sentience, and that the Adjudicator or the body stabbed itself to inflict pain.
Right.
But it's like, I don't really know. I mean, it's very up in the air. I just think it's really interesting how much background and interesting world building there is from this one big fat boss, that when the game originally came out, he was just known as that guy who can hit people through walls and sucks.
Right, yeah.
He just pissed everybody off.
Mm-hmm.
But I think over time, people started to realize, oh, there's actually a lot more to this boss than just guy who hits through walls and makes me mad. Because that's originally what he was known for, is the boss who can hit me through the wall.
Right. Yeah, with his insane tongue game.
Yes, and everyone was pissed about
Right.
it. When people say, why do people love the Souls games so much? I actually think this is why, for a lot of people. It's not just because they're this difficult challenge, it's because there's so many layers that you can get out of the game if you want, depending on how you want to enjoy it.
Right, yeah, you could just go through and play it, or you could actually look in to all the lore and figure things out. Why is this thing placed here? Why do the enemies in this world look this way? So on and so forth.
Yeah, and
so it's
the
pretty interesting.
Adjudicator is like a real example of
Yes.
that. Number 4. It's the 4th one.
4.
The next one we want to take a look at is Old King Allant, or as Nate calls him,
Alan.
yeah.
I just call him Alan.
But he's actually a demon in the form of the true King Allant. Now this is, I guess we're going to get into spoilers here, but I don't think people care at this point. This is not really the king. This is a demon that was created in the shape of the true King Allant to essentially rule the demons, at the very least in Boletaria, but essentially in this demon scourge.
Yeah.
And the whole point of it was so that the actual king could just hang out with the old one, because he at first was obsessed with power and the soul arts and all this. It led to his downfall. It ended up twisting his body into almost a slug-like, frog-like creature. But he is hiding out now with the old one, and he actually wants existence to end. He wants the world to be swallowed by fog. He wants all of these things to happen because he believes that it's essentially the old one is a mercy from God, and that human existence is so filled with suffering that the demons should overrun the land, consume all the humans, and then humans don't have to suffer anymore. So I think it's really interesting that there's a lot of lore around this guy too, but he's also known as that one douchebag who can de-level you.
But yeah, he's an interesting boss. He's also very fun to battle too.
Mm-hmm.
But one thing I found very interesting about him is actually his son. It's an optional side quest thingy you can do with an NPC. With his son Ostrava, which I found very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, you're following Ostrava around Boletaria as you're going throughout the worlds and helping him with different things, but you're trying to get him back to the castle so he can see his dad, basically.
Right.
And at the very end of his storyline, his quest line, he gets there, he arrives, but then when you find him, he's all depressed because he finds out that it's not his dad. And then he basically kills himself. And then you fight his
Black Phantom?
Black Phantom, yeah. So I found that very interesting because he's all excited to get to his dad, and he's like, "Oh, wait a minute, that's not my dad."
Right.
And then you finally get to King Allant, and you're like, "Oh, this is actually like a demon. This is interesting."
Yeah, and a lot of people describe his movements. I never really thought about this until I was reading about it, but it's true. He has a lot of movements that are somewhat similar to, actually, in Dark Souls 1, Ornstein.
Yeah.
His movement system is kind of similar to him. Ornstein obviously does not de-level you, but I do think it's really interesting how you can see they were taking the basis of the things they did in Demon Souls and sort of building on it, seeing what worked and what didn't. And I think that actually this boss, a lot of people complain about him because of being able to de-level you. I understand the frustration on that, but I actually think he's one of the more fun boss fights in the game.
Yeah, he was pretty interesting.
It's also high tense, I guess I would say high stakes because you can lose levels to him. So when you're actually in here, you're really trying to prioritize dodging getting around his attacks, healing, doing these kinds of things. It's kind of a boss you have to think about, which I thought really added to the actual fight.
And I also love the cutscene that happens after you beat him, too. So that was pretty cool. Yeah, I don't know. The whole boss around King Allant I thought was very interesting. One of my favorite ones.
Number three. So the next one is the Dragon God. This is an interesting boss. I actually fought it in the original Demon Souls as well. A lot of our footage is going to be from Remake. But yeah, I wanted to show this because this boss used to break the game. This boss is so huge. It is one of the biggest enemies. It's one of the biggest creatures in the entire Soulsborne franchise. There's a lot of technicality to this. It's almost like playing hide and seek with a boss while you're going through the arena. And there's also a lot of lore to him as well.
Yeah, that was something I found very interesting, was the lore. If you were just to play through this boss without looking at lore or anything like that, I think it'd be a pretty weird boss. Like, it's basically like this big dragon, and then you get to these weird like crossbow thingies that you shoot these giant spears into it. And if you're just playing the game, you'd be thinking, what are these like giant spear things?
Yeah, why is this here?
Yeah, that's kind of odd. But when you actually look into the lore of it, it's actually pretty interesting. It started out as large dragon bones, and they're worshipped by these burrowers, and then these bones were brought to life by the fog and turned into the demon, the dragon that you find. But before they were turned into the fog, the burrowers were scared that it would come to life again. So they built these like big, basically cannon things, like, but they're like crossbow things, to try to protect them in case that were to happen.
And then it happened to come to life because of the fog, so then that's how you're able to defeat it.
Right.
Which I think is really cool too. And there's also different things hidden in this boss arena. There's a sword hidden in this boss arena as well. There are crystal lizards running around at the beginning. So there's also some temptation here to run off after them and very easily miss them, which happened to me, and then get killed.
Right.
So basically this boss, it actually has a really unique idea behind it, you know, of actually hiding from the boss, making it from point to point, and then it's looking around and has this field of view, and it's just so massive that it's terrifying. Number two, the numero dos.
So the next one on our list is the Old Monk. So the Old Monk is pretty interesting. I want to talk actually about the boss fight first, because I found this kind of dumb, but also a really amazing concept. You get to the top of this tower, basically in Latria, and the boss is really unique. It's literally other players. Like, that's what the boss is you can actually summon yourself in other people's world and become the boss. I find that such a unique and fun concept. However, this is the internet, and people on the internet are douchebags.
Yeah.
So that's how this boss ends up turning out, is basically everyone stands at the gate, waits till you spawn in, and then they cheese backstab you, and then you can do nothing.
Which means that honestly the best way to play this boss is to just summon other players to help you.
Yes.
And then you go in and basically gangbang the guy who's trying to cheese you.
Yep.
Which is actually frustrating because you can play this boss without the summon mechanic, you know, where you actually are fighting the NPCs.
Yes.
And I thought that was fun. I do think this is a really cool idea, and the lore, which we're going to get into, is awesome. The setting is awesome. But the fact that people ruin these kinds of things by not having it feel like a fair fight, I think that's what sucks about this boss.
The times where I spawned in and the person waited for me to come in and then we actually could fight, that was fun. Because you actually felt like you were doing a boss, and the other person was nice enough to let you spawn in and just start the battle. That was cool. But most of the players are dicks.
Yeah. The lore of the boss, though, I think is what's most interesting to me. This was basically a disgruntled royal from this area of Latria. He was banished due to his depraved nature, and he actually returned with demons and power emanating from a golden robe that he had gotten. Now, here's the thing. We don't really know where this golden robe came from. That's interesting in and of itself. We do know this guy used to be the husband of the Queen of Latria. But, you know, after he got banished and he left, he came back with the golden robe and came back with some demons. Where was that robe from? And what really is it? You know, that's some of the interesting parts of this boss, because you could say, oh, it's just an outfit. It doesn't mean anything. but it does. It's alive. The lore in this game actually goes on to describe this robe, these head wrappings, as a golden robe worn by the old master of Latria, and eventually it took control of the then withered old man. So basically this guy lived out his life, but when he got too old and his body was withering, and probably his will as well, this robe took control of him. It's almost like a symbiote or a parasite. It also said that it is whispered that the robe now seeks to summon those who offer their aid, and carrying out its wishes grants them the use of these odd head wrappings, which is why players are being summoned to this world to defend these robes. Could the Golden Garb be seeking out a new vessel to subjugate, is the question that the lore ends on. Essentially, like this parasite, these cursed or alive robes that have a will of their own, possibly are now seeking out to take over the body of a new, stronger warrior. So it's like they used him to get their goal, just like he used these robes and the power from them to get his, of coming back and basically ruining the people who kicked him out. And we know that he came back and essentially ruined the people of the royal family who kicked him out, because this is actually in a throne room. All of the thrones are actually piled up to make one massive central throne in the middle of the room, which he's on. And there are pictures of royals around the room, which actually have a really unique detail on them.
Yeah, they're all crossed out.
Yeah.
Like all the faces of them are all X'd out or scratched off or something. Yeah, it's super interesting when you look around like the throne room of the old monk. This one and the Adjudicator, I think, were probably my two favorite in Demon Souls, at least specifically, but I think they're some of the most interesting Soulsborne bosses ever.
Yeah.
Just with the lore surrounding them.
Number 1! Splat.
So the final boss we have today is the Storm King. This is an oversized storm beast that shoots spears at you. It's actually shooting its bodily fluid at you, so it would fit in very well at an anime convention. And something I think is really interesting about this is that the storm beasts, we find out, were worshipped by the Shadow Men. Those are the same skeleton people that actually worshipped the Adjudicator. And because of that, it's interesting that in this land, what was brought to life or corrupted and changed were basically these gods worshipped by these Shadow Men.
Yeah, and one of the most interesting parts about this boss fight, I think, is actually a gimmick that it provides, and it's the sword. The Storm Ruler has a special ability only in this boss arena, which I found really cool. Basically, you can summon wind powers and attack the Storm King from a distance. It's super fun to like slash the Storm King with the wind powers. You can kill it normally if you have arrows and stuff like that. You can actually shoot it down. It takes a little bit longer. It's not as fun.
No.
But this, I thought, was such an interesting and fun gimmick for the world. But the Storm Ruler sword description says it's a large sword with a thorny, spiraled blade, now abandoned and most of its power lost. It seems that it once dominated foes, but in an area with ancestral spirits or a monolith forest, you may be able to see its past sky-cutting power. I thought this was one of the most fascinating and also most fun parts of this game, actually, was fighting the Storm King with this sword.
I love how it's this kind of magic enchanted burned out old sword that only now works in a magical area.
Yeah.
Where it can kind of draw on the powers around it. So it's almost like it itself is depleted, but if you take it to certain special places in the world, it will work. I thought that was really neat. I do wish that there were more places you could take it to make it work, though, than just here.
I wish you could just use it in the entire world.
It would, yeah, I mean, you can, it just doesn't have those powers.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I wish you could use it in the Storm world.
Yeah.
So I think that would be interesting. I understand bringing it to like the Boletaria and having it not work.
I do.
But in the Storm world, I think would be cool.
Yeah, I really wish there was just like another area or two at the very least where it did something.
Yes.
Another really interesting part of this boss is the description in the Morian blade. This is actually a blade you get from defeating the boss. You're able to make it by upgrading weapons and using the boss soul. It's described as a gnarled, thorny, large sword of black quartz forged from the soul of the demon Storm King. It is actually the marrow of the storm beasts. These beasts take pleasure in the wielder's peril, and in these situations, the blade's attack power is greatly increased. So this is interesting too, because it adds on the idea that these beings, at the very least once corrupted by the fog, we don't know about before that, they're kind of sadistic. They like the idea of people being in peril. which is why they all attack you. It's not just because you're in their area. Every time you come anywhere near a storm beast, they shoot this marrow at you.
Yeah, it's insanely annoying.
Yes, it is very annoying. But we actually found out why. The real answer is some programmer was a dick, but the actual answer in game is essentially that they like people being in peril, and it's kind of part of their joy, which is really screwed up. So anyway, these are 5 boss fights from Demon's Souls that we thought were really awesome. Again, most of the footage was the remake. We did play through the remake over on Degenerate Plays, our Let's Play channel in the description down below, so I hope you will actually check that out. We had a really fun time. We played through the whole game. We appreciate hanging out with you over there. There is also a Patreon. I want to take a moment here to thank our channel members and patrons. So I'm going to show some of you here. Thank you very much for your support. We appreciate you. Have a fantastic day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.